Good afternoon, fellow millennials, hustlers, and digital nomads. So, today I would like to talk about Bitcoin and why I personally think it should be a part of every millennial's personal financial portfolio. Just a disclaimer, of course, this is not professional investment advice, and you should always do your own research. This is just my personal opinion. Okay, but anyways, let's dive into why I think Bitcoin is important for everyone in our present day life and the future, and why I think it should be a part of everybody's personal financial portfolio. Okay, so the first reason is that Bitcoin is truly decentralized. It's probably the first, it's the first currency in history that's truly decentralized, meaning that there is not a single central authority that can decide what to do with it, right? So if you think about fiat currencies, so the regular money that we're used to, like US dollars, euro, British pounds, Chinese yuan, Japanese yen, whatever, all these things, they're all centralized currencies. What that means is every country has a central bank, or the European Union has the European Central Bank, that decides what to do with the amount, the supply, and the policies of these currencies, right? So you know how like around the world these currencies are always trading with each other, forex trading. They have different exchange rate and it's always fluctuating. So that's usually a result of supply and demand. So sometimes when a country's economy is suffering, they want people to invest more into the country, so they want to make the country's exports cheaper, right? So what they'll do is they'll print more money, they'll inject more money into the system so that their country's currency becomes more diluted. Its value drops, the exchange rate drops, then it becomes cheaper for foreigners to buy products from that country. So, so when you hear people talk about like currency wars and currency manipulation, that's basically what they're referring to, right? And of course, this year has been a crazy, very special year in history. We had the pandemic, and then in March, we had the huge market crash across all the markets, stocks, gold, crypto, everything, right? So obviously there was a lot of panic because the economy crashed, because all the stores, all the shops had to close, all the travel industry basically got frozen overnight, and people panic. So when people panic, they sell everything for cash so they can pay for their bills, right? And what happened after that was the central banks around the world started panicking as well. They don't want the economy to crash, because then people start causing unrest, right? So what they did was the Federal Reserve, for example, the Central Bank of the United States, they printed, I think, something like more than 2 trillion US dollars, like new dollars injected into the system in the month of March alone. That is a huge number. That's more than the amount of money they printed after the 2008 financial crisis. So if you think about it, if you're a regular person saving your money, let's say, you keep your money in a bank account, nowadays, bank accounts give you almost no interest, so your money is just sitting there, right? And then suddenly, there's $2 trillion of new money coming into the entire system, which basically dilutes the supply significantly. What that does is, over time, it's going to have effects. It's going to lower the unit value of your dollar, right? So each dollar is going to be worth less because there's just so much more supply. And that's how inflation works over the long run, because everything in the markets is about supply and demand. So when there's a whole ton of money in a system, but the amount of resources and the amount of productivity, everything remains the same, then obviously each unit of money is going to be worth less over time, right? So Bitcoin solves that problem of centralization and currency manipulation, because the whole network is secured and verified by a network of miners and what's called nodes. So there is no central party that just decides like this what to do with it, right? So that's really powerful, because you can be sure that if you have some Bitcoin, the monetary policy of the Bitcoin is not going to change, and no central party is going to tell you what to do or what not to do with your money, right? So again, if I have money in a bank account, sometimes, let's say if I suddenly decide to send $5,000 to someone in Nigeria, my bank will probably see that as a suspicious transfer, right? So they might flag it and then they'll freeze it. And that's happened also with my credit card. I sometimes I use, because I travel a lot, so sometimes I use my credit card in random countries, 3 different countries in a week or something. Then my credit card always gets frozen. I mean, it's for security measures, of course, but at the same time, sometimes they'll do that for no reason really, and then it's very frustrating because then you have to call them, you have to deal with customer service, and sometimes in the case of bank transfers, you have to wait for days before it gets resolved, right? So that's really annoying because if it's my money, I should be able to decide what to do with it. So with Bitcoin, you can have your personal wallet, and once you put your Bitcoins in your wallet and you have access to your private keys, that money is yours. It's truly yours, right? So no one else can tell you what to do with it. Most of the time, I mean, if you take good care, people can't even know how much you have, right? So yeah, it's very powerful. You can be your own private bank, basically, and I think there's a lot of demand for that, especially going to the future as state surveillance and everything increases, especially the wealthy people, or any one of us who likes to have sovereignty over our own money. We're going to find this technology to be very attractive, right? So that's very, very bullish in my opinion. And of course, another big feature of Bitcoin is that it has a fixed total supply. It has a total supply of 21 million BTC, and that's all there ever is going to be, right? And actually, the fixed supply is what gives Bitcoin the property of being scarce, having scarcity, right? And that's extremely important for a money and an asset that can be considered a store of value, right? Because you don't want something that just inflates like crazy. You don't want something that someone in a central bank can just make like twice the amount overnight, right? Then it's not going to be valuable. So you want something that's scarce, that's limited, that's rare, and that there's going to be increasing demand over time, because then more people want it, but the amount remains the same, so the value is going to go up, right? Is inevitable. And that's why gold is very valuable, because historically gold has always been a precious metal that's very hard to mine, that has quite limited supply in the earth, right? Also, of course, it's a very stable metal. It doesn't react with anything, so it's good for long-term safekeeping. But that's beside the point. But anyway, so the reason gold is sort of the standard store of value for humanity, for civilization, for thousands of years, is because of that. Because it's hard to find, it's rare, it's precious, and it's very reliable. But nowadays, in the world that we currently live in, gold doesn't make too much sense in the long term because everything is digital, right? We travel a lot. The world is globalized. If it's basically impossible to actually use gold. So if you buy a gold bar, you can keep it in a safe in your house. That's about it. You can hold it over a long period of time to store value in that sense, but you can't actually really use it as money, right? Because imagine if you're traveling through the airport with a gold bar in your luggage. They're definitely going to stop you at the security scanner, and they're probably going to confiscate it, or they'll just automatically assume that you're a criminal or something, right? So Bitcoin has been referenced as the digital gold, right? So that means that it has some of the properties of gold, like being scarce, being very reliable, being high in security, and having a fixed amount. But also it's digital, which means that it's borderless, it's instantaneous nearly, right? So you can send Bitcoin from me to you across the continent in minutes or in half an hour, but you can't do that with gold. So that gives it a lot of potential for growth, Bitcoin for adoption. Because I was looking at the stats of Bitcoin wallets. I think currently there's only like 30 or 35 million active Bitcoin wallet addresses in the world or something. So that's a tiny fraction of the world's population, right? So as you know, the further we move forward with digitization, with technology, the more people become familiar and comfortable with using digital currencies. Then the fact that Bitcoin is the biggest digital currency with the strongest network security, the biggest ecosystem, and the only one that's truly decentralized and has a fixed total supply. All of those factors will mean that the demand for Bitcoin will definitely increase over the long run. Okay, so you might ask, what about all the other cryptos, Ethereum and Ripple and Chainlink, whatever, all these other cryptos? What about them, right? So the thing is, Bitcoin is actually the only cryptocurrency out there that's truly decentralized. So all the other cryptocurrencies were founded by someone, um, either through like an initial coin offering, a token sale, like ICO, or some sort of what's called a pre-mine. So most of the other coins, the founders already have a huge supply of it, and they are the ones who are deciding how the protocol works, and if they can change something to the protocol, they can do it, right? So those are not really anything different from fiat currency. If they want to be money, they're not really any different from fiat currency, right? Because they're centralized, they're centrally controlled, and yeah, and a lot of them don't even have a fixed supply. They're just forever inflating. So they're just not very attractive, in my opinion, if you're thinking of a cryptocurrency truly as a currency or money or store of value. However, I'm not totally writing them off. Personally, I personally invest in some of these altcoins as well. I think right now we're at the beginning of a bull market, of a multi-year bull market, and usually in a bull market, it's fine to dabble in investing in other altcoins because their market caps are smaller, their unit costs are lower, so there's just more room, let's say, for them to pump for price appreciation, right? So that's fine, But personally, I would never hold an altcoin in my portfolio for a long period of time. Like right now, I think we're at the beginning of a bull market, and what I'll do is if I see a coin I think has potential for growth, then I'll buy some. And then once it pumps, then I'll flip it after a couple of weeks or something like that, right? I would never hold an altcoin for an extended period of time unless, Ethereum I think is okay. It's quite big. It has a huge ecosystem. A lot of developers and a lot of people are building all sorts of experimental applications on top of it. So it's good. It has a large community, strong community, and has a lot of interest, both in terms of tech and investment. So I don't mind it. Some people are very philosophical about this stuff, and they're like either all Bitcoin or all Ethereum. But I try to keep an open mind because ultimately we want to make money and we want to do what's best for ourselves, right? So yeah, but any other coin, I would not recommend keeping it in your portfolio for the long run. Diversification is okay if you don't really know what you're doing. Buy a few things. But if you're familiar with the topic, I would not keep any other small altcoins or shitcoins in my portfolio for the long run. I would speculate on the short term, but not on the long run. And if you look at historic charts, anytime the bull market is over, anytime there's an extended bear market, and people start to realize that all those other little altcoins have no real value whatsoever. They were just made for the founders to make a profit, basically, right? So then what they do is all of their values, they just slowly decline towards zero. Ultimately, Bitcoin is the one that usually drops the least in the bear market, and it's the one that you can actually rely on, basically, in terms of cryptocurrencies. So one question I often get from my friends is they'll ask me, they'll be like, "Hey Hope, is it a good time to buy Bitcoin right now because the price seems a bit high?" And to answer that, I would say it really depends on your perspective and whether or not you have read about and understood what Bitcoin is and what its value is, and if you believe in its value, right? So if you do, then chances are you would have a fairly long-term outlook, let's say at least 2 years or up to 5 years, 10 years even, right? So in that case, then it doesn't really matter whether the price right now is $11,000 or $11,400. A couple $100 is gonna make very, very little difference in the long run, right? So if you have an investor's mindset, then it shouldn't matter to you. You could also just dollar cost average in, like over time. Buy a little bit every time it drops a bit. Buy the dip. It's a little bit less stressful psychologically, I would say, than putting a bunch of money in at once, right? Because then it could drop and it might be very painful. But yeah, so I mean, there's two types of people. You could be an investor looking more in the long term, or you could be a trader, right? Or some people are doing both, which is fine. I do both sometimes. If you're a trader, then of course short-term price matters because you're trading the short time frame movements, and you're actively managing your trading account, right? But if you're, for a lot of people who are beginners or who are not familiar with crypto and the markets in general, then it's much safer and easier to stick to just buying some over time and then buying a little bit more over time and then just holding, right? And that's what I would recommend, especially dollar cost averaging. If you're new, then dollar cost averaging is always the best way to go, I would say. There's one more thing I just want to mention. So actually, a lot of people who are new to Bitcoin or unfamiliar with it don't realize that with cryptocurrencies in general, you can actually buy a fraction of it, right? So you can buy a fraction of one Bitcoin. Because a lot of people see the price of one Bitcoin, they're like, oh my God, it's 11,000. So they're immediately scared or turned off, or they don't have enough money to buy one. But you don't need to buy one. You can just buy a small fraction. You can buy any dollar amount, right? So it's not the same as stocks where you have to buy 1 share, 2 shares, 100 shares, right? So for example, here I'm on Bitstamp, and I can type in however much I want to buy. So I have $1,000 in my account here. If I want to buy, set the buy price, let's say I want to buy at $11,000, I can just buy 0.003, whatever, right? And that would be approximately $3 of BTC. Or if I want to change that to 0.01, that's approximately $110 of BTC. Okay, so in summary, I highly recommend every millennial to consider having Bitcoin as a part of your personal financial portfolio. Because first of all, of course, it acts as a hedge against currency risk, right? Like I mentioned earlier, with all the rampant money printing and stimulus by central banks and the inevitable inflation that's going to come over the long term, it's good to have an asset that's similar to gold, right? That has scarcity and is reliable, and of course, being digital just gives it extra perks, right? So that's number one. Number two, because of Bitcoin's decentralization properties and the fact that you get to basically be your own bank and own your own money, I think that's very, very attractive for a lot of people, especially wealthy people. Let's say if in the United States or whatever country they decide to raise the taxes, which might be really bad for the rich people, and then what happens is the rich people are the ones with resources, with options, right? So they'll either just leave or they'll move some of their money into other assets that are better protected from the IRS or whatever, right? So Bitcoin could be an option. And of course, whenever you're investing, you want to be on the same side as the successful and the rich, right? You don't want to be on the same side as the people who don't know how to invest or don't have money. And the third point is, I think we're still early in the space. Like I mentioned, there's only about 30 million active Bitcoin wallet addresses out there. So there's not that many people who are actually actively using it yet, which is always a good sign, because whenever you're investing, again, you want to be an early adopter. You don't want to be the one that's coming in late at the very top, right? So I think it's still early. I think we're at the start of a new bull cycle, which is really, really good. And it doesn't hurt to have at least a small fraction of your portfolio in BTC. And lastly, I just want to show you, I have a collection of fiat currencies from several countries around the world here. And all of them are fiat currencies that have depreciated significantly in value. So I hope this shows you, just over the space of 10, 20 years, a country's currency can go from totally reasonable to absolutely worthless, right? So there's a lot of risk depending on the government of the country that you may live in. So that's something you should really guard against. And that's why in a lot of countries, people don't trust their local currencies. They whenever they have money, they're just converted to US dollars. They'll save US dollars. And, if the same thing happens to the US dollar or one of the other major currencies, then people are going to have to run into something else, whether it's gold or potentially Bitcoin. And on that note, I'm going to sign off for today. I'll leave you to think about what I said in this video, and let me know if you have any questions or comments. And also, I've written a blog post for newcomers on how you can buy your first Bitcoins, and I'll drop the link in the description below, so check it out.